lost tribes. The story of the tribe of Naphtali. 2nd Esdras chapter 13 verses 40 through 50. Verse 40. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Osea the king, whom Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go forth into a further country, where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Arsareth. Then dwelt they there until the latter time, and now when they shall begin to come. The highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. But those that be left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. Now when he destroyeth the multitude of the nations that are gathered together, he shall defend his people that remain. And then shall he show them great wonders, discovering the journey of the tribe of Naphtali from Israel to the South Pacific. Bilhah gives birth for Rachel to Jacob's 10th son named Naphtali, meaning my wrestling. Genesis chapter 30, verses 7 through 8. From an early age, Naphtali's athleticism was apparent. His swiftness was compared to that of a deer in Genesis chapter 49, verse 21. So Jacob his father appointed him for all messages to be delivered, and this was the blessing he would receive on Jacob's deathbed. Naphtali was also recognized as one of the wisest of his brethren, with Jacob stating that Naphtali speaks goodly words, which means wise words. He was known to be very knowledgeable in physiology. Naphtali had a deep connection to the Most High, and his connection to our creation and this earth. This wisdom would perpetually be passed down to his descendants. Naphtali was also known to be as faithful and dependable as any of his brothers as a protector. Naphtali in the book of Jasher is often found entering to save and assist his brothers at the perfect times. Moses states that Naphtali would be satisfied with favor. This means that Naphtali would be blessed and full of beauty. This blessing once again is twofold. Naphtali would be blessed with the most beautiful land in Israel and some of the most beautiful land in the last days. This would also apply to Naphtali and his descendants' beautiful countenance. Naphtali's land was centered around the shores of the Sea of Galilee, giving them some of the most fertile and productive land in all of Canaan. Naphtali's land was often referred to as the Garden of Palestine. The beauty of their land in Israel will be reflected also in the lands in which they would end up in the last days. Naphtali was also known for being comely. Moses would go on to give a geographical location of where a large number of the tribe of Naphtali would be in the last days, saying that they would possess the west and the south. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 23. Given that these are two different directions, it doesn't nail down an exact location. What we find looking at the Hebrew is that the word west is a mistranslation. The Hebrew work H3220 is yam, and the definition of yam is sea as in the ocean. The word there is not west, but rather sea. Moses tells the tribe of Naphtali that they would possess the South Seas in the last days. So to identify Naphtali, we must find these 6 points. Number 1, curses. Number 2, dwells in the South Seas. Number 3, extremely beautiful, bountiful land. Number 4, incredibly athletic, fast and powerful. Number 5, full of wisdom. Number 6, fierce warriors. From the source Merriam-Webster.com, the definition of South Sea, of or relating to the seas of the Southern Hemisphere and especially the South Pacific. Moses gave a geographical location of the lands of the tribe of Naphtali in the last days. The South Seas refers to the islands in the South Pacific Ocean. These islands, such as Fiji, Tonga, Hawaii, Samoa, and New Zealand, are well known for the beauty of their land, with the Pacific Islands being one of the most popular locations for vacation, showing that the beauty attributed to the land of Naphtali is in fact fulfilled in the Pacific. The South Pacific is home to thousands of islands and 3 people groups known as the Melanesians, Polynesians, and Micronesians. According to an article on academic.oup.com titled Melanesian and Asian Origins of Polynesians, mtDNA and Y chromosome gradients across the Pacific, the human settlement of the Pacific Islands represents one of the most recent major migration events of mankind. Polynesians originated in Asia, according to linguistic evidence, or in Melanesia, according to archaeological evidence. To shed light on the genetic origins of Polynesians, we investigated over 400 Polynesians from 8 island groups in comparison with over 900 individuals from potential parental populations of Melanesia, Southeast and East Asia, and Australia by means of Y chromosome, NRY, and mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA markers. After the studies, overall, we classified 94.1% of Polynesian Y chromosomes and 99.8% of Polynesian mtDNAs as of either Melanesian NRY DNA having 65.8% and mtDNA having 6% or Asian origin, with NRY DNA with only 28.3% and mtDNA coming in with 93.8%. These findings suggest a dual genetic origin of Polynesians in agreement with the slow boat hypothesis. Our data also suggests a pronounced admixture bias in Polynesians toward more Melanesian men than women, perhaps as a result of mature local residence in the ancestral Polynesian society. Although dating methods are consistent with somewhat similar entries of NRY and mtDNA haplogroups into Polynesia, haplotype sharing suggests an earlier appearance of Melanesian haplogroups than those from Asia. Surprisingly, we identified gradients in the frequency distribution of some NRY and mtDNA haplogroups across Polynesia and a gradual west to east decrease of overall NRY and mtDNA diversity, which not only provides evidence for a west to east direction of Polynesian settlements, but also suggesting that Pacific voyaging was regular rather than haphazard. We also demonstrate that Fiji played a pivotal role in the history of Polynesia. Humans probably first migrated to Fiji, and subsequent settlement of Polynesia probably came from Fiji. With it being widely accepted that the Polynesians and Micronesians have the same DNA, these DNA tests prove that all 3 of those Pacific Islander groups come from the same people, although many come to the conclusion that the Polynesian and Micronesian race, given that Micronesians come from Polynesians, are from East Asia, particularly Taiwan. The Polynesian race begins with the quote-unquote black people in Melanesia. Due to this gap in Samoan history, their history of migration from East India to the Southeast Asian islands to Melanesia before their journey to the Pacific Islands is not recorded. In the read, Hawaiian Antiquities, Mulelo Hawaii by David Malo, it has been said, however, that this race of people came from the lewa, meaning the firmament or the atmosphere, from the windward or back of the island, or Kuaukamoku in the Hawaiian language. The meaning of these expressions is that they came from a foreign land, that is the region of air, and the front of that land is at the back of these islands. Perhaps this was a people forced to flee hither by war, or driven in this direction by bad winds and storms. Perhaps the expression lewa, or regions of air, Asia is referred to. Perhaps this expression refers to islands they visited on their way hither, so that on their arrival they declared they came from the back, or the windward, of these islands. Perhaps this race of people was derived from the Israelites, because we know that certain customs of the Israelites were practiced here in Hawaii. Circumcision, places of refuge, taboos, and ceremonies of purification relating to dead bodies and their burial, taboos and restrictions pertaining to a flowing woman, and the taboo that secluded a woman as defiled during the 7 days after childbirth. All these customs were formerly practiced by the people of Hawaii. Perhaps these people are those spoken of in the Word of God as the lost sheep of the house of Israel, because on inspection we clearly see that the people of Asia are just like the inhabitants of these islands of Tahiti and the lands adjacent. David Malo, a high-ranking counselor, a Hawaiian intellectual, educator, politician, and minister from Hawaii, wrote a book detailing the history of the Polynesians, as well as their possible origin as the lost tribes of Israel, as well as providing cultural evidence of this possibility. In the book, Te Ika a Maui, or New Zealand and its Inhabitants by Richard Taylor, page 8. May not this beautiful parable have its literal fulfillment in the history of the New Zealand race? In it may we not behold one of the long-lost tribes of Israel, which, with its fellows, having abandoned the service of the true God and cast aside his word, fell step by step in the scale of civilization, deprived of a fixed home, became nomad wanderers over the steppes of Asia, a byword and a reproach among the nations, and gradually retreated until in the lapse of ages they reached the sea. And thence, still preserving their wandering character, from island to island driven by winds and currents and various causes, they finally reach New Zealand, and there fall into their lowest state of degradation, given up to the fiercest passions, consumed and being consumed, they are enabled to reflect, repent, and amend, and resolve to arise and go to their Father. Even Richard Taylor, a Christian missionary in New Zealand, dwelt amongst the Maori in their worst estate, and knew them to be from one of the lost tribes based purely on their journey, which echoes that of David Malo and Ali Felela. Continuing with the read, Te Ika a Maui, or New Zealand and its Inhabitants by Richard Taylor, page 190. In the meantime, I shall add at the end of this chapter a list of a few words which seem to bear an affinity to many we are accustomed to, and conclude with venturing to hint that the many points of resemblance in feature, general customs, and in manners may enable us to discover in the widely spread Polynesian race a remnant of the long-lost tribes of Israel. Richard Taylor again confirms his claim that the whole race of Polynesians, which must include Melanesians and Micronesians, are from the lost tribes. However, on the next page, he confirms once again that David Malo and Ali Felela were correct about the path the tribe of Naphtali took to the Pacific Ocean. Refer to the book Te Ika a Maui, or New Zealand and its Inhabitants by Richard Taylor, page 191. So when the king of Assyria carried away the 10 tribes, though he placed them primarily on the shores of the Caspian, that would not long suit their habits of traffic, they would doubtless seek the grand marts of commerce. No longer possessing fixed homes, they became merchants as a matter of course, and those who still continued to love war and independence or a pastoral life would retire before their enemies, and thus, should it be proved that the Afghans are Jews, we see how they would reach that country. While some, perhaps those from Babylon, remained in India, as the black Jews state they have done, some would pass on thence, and the people of the Indian Isles, as the Malays. From the Caspian, many may have followed the caravans across Central Asia, Tibet, and Tartary until they reached the eastern coast, and thence from island to island, this race, doomed to wander, may have done so, either intentionally or otherwise, as ships are constantly picking up large canoes which have drifted away from their island homes. Scholars confirm the exact path from the Middle East, while still excluding their travel through the Melanesian islands. This confirms not only that the Polynesians are indeed Israelites, but also the exact route they took to the Pacific Ocean, and where remnants may have been left on the way. According to scriptures, the tribe of Naphtali were a physically imposing people, as Naphtali was known to have been a monster of a man with much power and athleticism. It is these same traits that make Pacific Islanders prime scouting grounds for sports like football and rugby. Not only does their genetics contribute to their massive size and extraordinary physical ability, but they also live on land that is perfect for optimizing the body's ability to grow and develop. Reference the source fluentrugby.com. Why are Pacific Islanders so good at rugby? The Pacific Islanders are natural mesomorphs, which means they are naturally large people who can gain weight, including muscle and fat, easily. They have thick frames, wide shoulders, large heads, and thick wrists and ankles. Mesomorphs tend to be very strong and explosive. These physical attributes make Pacific Islanders perfectly suited to the rigors of rugby. Freaky athletic prowess appears to be far more common among Pacific Islanders than other groups of people. It is totally common to line up against Pacific Islander players who are 120 kilograms or 264.5 pounds, with ankles thicker than your calves and wrists as wide as your forearms, who can dust your winger over 20 meters or 22 yards. This unusual mix of size and speed, which is perfectly suited to rugby, is rare in most population groups, but is far more among Pacific Islanders. Just like their forefather Naphtali, Polynesians are also well known for their swiftness, much like a hind let loose. More from the Read Hawaiian Antiquities by David Malo, page 301. Foot racing, or kukini, was a very popular amusement. It was associated with betting and was conducted in the following manner. The kukini, or swift runners, were a class of men who were trained with great severity and made to practice running very frequently until they had attained great speed. When the people wished to indulge in betting, a number of the fastest of this class were selected, and 2 of this number were chosen to run a race. It is not a coincidence that running races was an enormous part of islander culture and was one of the major traveling sports in the ancient Pacific world, with records of them running long distances around islands and from one city to another in outstanding time, much like what we find with Naphtali in the book of Jasher. Naphtali and his descendants were also known for being excellent warriors. This is also something that we should also find in the Polynesians, should they actually be from the tribe of Naphtali. The Polynesians and Melanesians were infamous in the Old World for their prowess, innovation, and overall dominance on the battlefield. Between the Maori and Kamehameha's commandos, Polynesians warriors make up some of the finest men in battle there are. Kamehameha's commandos were masters of war on land and sea, and on their own united the kingdom of Hawaii. The Maori were the most fierce warriors, and are known for inventing what we know today as trench warfare. Finally, the Ainu in Japan had the samurai, who were arguably some of the most iconic warriors in history. The Ainu's closest relatives of the Polynesians, while 6 of them are from the tribe of Gad, from the greater group of Jamin. The islanders of the Pacific also suffered the curses of Deuteronomy 28, being taken on ships into slavery. In the reed, Slavers in Paradise, the Peruvian labor trade in Polynesia, 1862 through 1864 by H.E. Maud. This is the story of the barks and brigs that sailed out of Callao in Peru, calling at every Pacific island group except Hawaii, kidnapping thousands of men, women, and children by violence and treachery, and transporting them to slavery and death. It is an absorbing narrative of the conflict between human greed and bewildered innocence set in the romantic isles of the South Seas. It tells of how the unsuspecting islanders were captured, leaving in many cases only the aged and the children to reconstruct their stricken communities of what befell them as slaves in Peru. During the 19th century, the Polynesians, Micronesians, and Melanesians suffered hard bondage and slavery, known in history as blackbirding. European colonists in Australia, South America, and even the Pacific Islands themselves often kidnapped and sometimes paid very poor wages to the islanders, often taking them on slave ships to any particular country or island where their services were required. The British murdered hundreds of thousands of Maori after stealing and encroaching upon their land before eventually taking all of it for themselves. The Maori still suffer many of the same forms of racism blacks suffer in America. This ranges from receiving unfair prison sentences compared to white who committed similar crimes, more likely to be killed by or have a gun pulled on them by police, living below living wage because of faulty education and low-paying jobs. The islands of the Pacific not only fit the prophecies given by both Moses and Jacob, but the people also reflect the character, nature, and prophecies given by them as well. This makes those natives who inhabit the islands of the Pacific from Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. Settlements from travel can still be found in areas such as Portuguese India, Bombay, Goa, Cochin, Kabul, Nepal, Southeast Asia, Sinem, Malaysia, Indonesia, Madagascar, East Africa, and the Philippines. In conclusion, the connection of the South Pacific peoples not only enriched the historical understanding of these islands, but also provides a profound link to their ancient biblical heritage. This convergence of the credible studies from various notable sources, the scriptural descriptions, geographic locations, genetic evidence paired with the cultural practices strongly suggests that the South Pacific Islanders, the Melanesians, Polynesians, and Micronesians, are a related people that are likely direct descendants of their forefather, Naphtali.